It started as one of those mornings that felt too perfect, like the world had conspired to set the stage for something special. Sunlight poured through the tall windows of my mother-in-law's house, dust motes drifting in golden beams that lit up the wide living room where she always hosted her parties. The house buzzed with voices, laughter, and the restless energy of children who had been told something exciting was about to happen. She had called this gathering weeks in advance, insisting it was for the grandchildren and repeating that there would be a surprise they would never forget. The word spread like wildfire through the family. Some whispered she might finally be giving money, maybe setting up savings for the kids. Others speculated she was dividing her jewelry, her prized heirlooms she guarded so fiercely. Nobody knew, but the anticipation grew until the very air carried it. By the time we arrived, balloons were tied to the porch rails, trays of food lined the long dining table, and my nieces and nephews darted up and down the hall squealing with excitement. Phones were out, cameras ready, as if everyone wanted to be sure they captured whatever moment was about to unfold. I sat on the sofa with my daughter Emily, just 7 years old, who clutched her stuffed bunny, its once white fur now gray, and its ears frayed from years of love. Her eyes sparkled with a mix of nervousness and hope. This was the first year she was old enough to truly understand that Grandma's gifts meant more than just toys. They meant being part of the club, being included in something that everyone else seemed to take for granted. When my mother-in-law finally entered, she carried herself like a queen about to hold court. In her arms was a neat stack of small velvet boxes, identical and perfect. A collective gasp swept through the room, and I felt Emily straighten beside me, her grip on her bunny tightening as her anticipation grew. One by one, the boxes were handed out. My nephew received a gleaming gold bracelet with his initials carefully engraved. Applause and cheers filled the room. My niece's box revealed the same, another bracelet, tiny, delicate, and priceless. More boxes, more bracelets, more squeals of joy. Phones clicked. "Thank you, Grandma. You're the best." The room was alive with excitement. Beside me, Emily's wide eyes followed every handoff, her small lips parted in awe. She sat up taller, waiting for her turn, her face glowing with the unspoken certainty that she was about to be just like the rest. Then it happened. My mother-in-law reached the bottom of the stack. She glanced at Emily, her hand hovering over the final box as though weighing a choice. Slowly, almost theatrically, she pulled it back against her chest. Her smile was polite, thin, sharp enough to cut. "Maybe next time, sweetheart," she said with a dismissive softness. The room stilled. Children froze mid-giggle. Parents shifted uneasily, eyes darting but mouths silent. The air turned heavy, pressing against my chest. Emily blinked, confusion spilling across her little face. Her lips trembled as she leaned toward me and whispered so faintly that only I could hear. "Mommy, did I do something bad?" I swear my heart shattered in that instant. Watching your child's hope crumble, watching innocence turn to doubt, it is a kind of pain that scorches the soul. I pulled her close, whispering back, "No, baby, you didn't." Outwardly, I stayed calm, but inside I was screaming. Around us, the party struggled to stumble forward. Parents clapped awkwardly, voices suddenly strained as they praised the bracelets. Kids showed off their treasures, their joy dulled by confusion. Phones were pocketed. No one wanted to record anymore. Across the room, my husband Mark stood near the fireplace, his jaw rigid, fists clenched so hard his knuckles were white. His gaze wasn't on me. It was fixed squarely on his mother. I thought about grabbing Emily and leaving, but as I started to rise, Mark caught my arm. His voice was a low growl beneath the chatter. "Wait," he said. "Just wait." And then he slipped quietly upstairs. 10 minutes crawled by like hours. I held Emily close, rubbing small circles on her back as her stuffed bunny absorbed her tears. I kept my face stoic, but my vision blurred more than once. Around us, the forced laughter continued, though every word echoed hollow. Nobody dared address the cruelty hanging in the air, but every parent knew. They knew. When Mark returned, his steps were deliberate, his face unreadable, but his presence alone shifted the room's energy. In his hands was a small wooden box I'd never seen before. He walked directly to his mother, standing tall and unyielding. The room fell into silence so complete you could hear the soft tick of the grandfather clock in the corner. "Mom," he said, his voice clear and sharp. "Do you remember Dad's pocket watch?" Her eyes flickered, startled, then wary. "Of course. Why?" Mark lifted the lid of the box, revealing the gleaming gold watch, the one his father had worn every day until the end of his life. It wasn't just a timepiece, it was a symbol of legacy, of continuity, of belonging. It was the most treasured heirloom in the family. "Dad gave this to me before he passed." Mark continued, his voice steady, though the weight of memory trembled beneath it. "He told me to give it to someone who deserves it, someone who understands family." Then Mark knelt in front of Emily. Her small eyes widened, shimmering with tears as she whispered, "For me." "Yes, sweetheart," Mark said, his voice breaking ever so slightly. "Because you do deserve it. Because you are part of this family. Because you are special, and no one will ever make you feel like you're not." He placed the watch into her tiny hands, and she held it as though it were magic itself. Tears streamed freely down her cheeks, and I felt my own heart swell and break at once. Mark rose to his full height, the room still gripped in silence, and turned back to face his mother. His voice hardened, carrying the kind of conviction that left no space for argument. "I don't care what your reasons are. You will never make my daughter feel like she is less than. Not in my house. Not in front of me." The color drained from her face. For the first time since I had known her, she looked small, almost fragile. Her lips trembled as she began to speak. "I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did," Mark cut in, sharp as a blade. "But it ends now." A ripple of discomfort moved through the family. My sisters-in-law shifted, glancing between each other. My brother-in-law coughed into his hand. The children stood frozen, clutching their bracelets, their earlier joy clouded by guilt and confusion. Then slowly, my sister-in-law stepped forward. She crouched beside Emily, laying a gentle hand on her shoulder. Her voice cracked with emotion as she said, "That's a beautiful watch, sweetheart. You deserve it." The dam broke. Murmurs of agreement rose. One of the nephews stepped closer, peering at the watch in Emily's hand. "It's cooler than a bracelet," he said with the blunt honesty only children have. His words brought a tiny smile to Emily's face, shy but real, as though a fragile thread of belonging had been stitched back into place. Across the room, my mother-in-law stood, rooted, her shoulders sagging under the weight of unspoken truths that had lingered for years. She had always been a woman of control, shaping family moments to her design, deciding who received affection, who earned approval, who was quietly set aside. For so long the others had tolerated it, swallowing the discomfort, hoping to keep the peace. But in that single act, Mark kneeling before his daughter with his father's watch, the silence had been broken. The balance she once commanded shattered. The rest of the party dissolved quickly after that. Laughter never returned, replaced instead by hushed voices and sidelong glances. Food sat untouched, the balloons drooped unnoticed. It was clear to everyone that something had shifted permanently. We gathered our things quietly. Mark took my hand firmly in his expression resolute but tired. Emily clutched the pocket watch in both hands, her bunny tucked under her arm, as though she feared both treasures might vanish if she let go. The drive home was quiet, the car filled with the sound of tires humming against the road. Emily's small head soon slumped to the side, asleep. Her fingers still wrapped tightly around the golden watch. I turned to look at Mark. His eyes were fixed on the road, but his grip on the steering wheel was rigid. After a long silence, he spoke, his voice low. "I'm sorry it had to be like that." I shook my head slowly. "Don't apologize. You showed her what love looks like. She'll never forget this day, and neither will anyone else who was in that room." He glanced at me briefly, his eyes shadowed with something deeper than anger. I couldn't let her feel that way. Not Emily. Not our daughter. His knuckles whitened again on the wheel. I couldn't watch her go through what I went through. I didn't answer right away. His words hit me with the weight of realization. All at once, the pieces fit together, the quiet resentments he carried, the distance he sometimes kept at family gatherings, the way he stiffened when his mother made jokes at his expense. I reached over, laying my hand on his arm. He didn't look at me, but the lines of his jaw softened slightly, and I knew he felt my understanding. That night, after carrying a sleeping Emily up to her bed, I tucked her in carefully. She stirred just enough to murmur, her small voice laced with drowsy wonder, "Daddy's watch makes me feel like a princess." I kissed her forehead gently. "You're more than a princess, baby. You're loved." Her lips curved into the faintest smile before she drifted back into dreams, the watch still nestled in her hands like a talisman. Downstairs, I found Mark sitting at the kitchen table, his head in his hands. When he finally looked up, his eyes were wet but steady. I couldn't watch her go through what I went through. He repeated softer this time, more to himself than to me. And in that moment, I understood fully. He hadn't only been protecting Emily, he had been protecting the little boy he once was. The boy who had probably sat in that same house decades earlier, feeling overlooked, unseen, unwanted. The boy who had silently wished someone would fight for him. That night, Mark had broken the cycle. He had turned humiliation into protection, cruelty into compassion, silence into truth. He had given Emily not just a watch, not just a moment of inclusion, but a lesson she would carry forever, that she mattered, that she belonged, that she was worth standing up for. The following days carried a strange quiet. Emily showed off the pocket watch to her friends at school, though she was too young to grasp its full weight. To her, it was magic, a treasure that sparkled with love. At home, she would wind it carefully, watching the hands tick forward, whispering to her bunny that Daddy had said she was special. Each time I saw her do it, a lump rose in my throat. For Mark, the weight was heavier. He went about his routines, but his silence stretched longer than usual, his gaze often distant. One evening, as we sat together on the porch, I finally asked him what was truly gnawing at him. He exhaled slowly, his eyes fixed on the fading sunset. "You know," he said, "when I was Emily's age, Mom used to do the same thing. Handing out little tokens, deciding who earned her attention that day. I'd sit there waiting just like Emily did. Sometimes I got something, sometimes I didn't. And every time I didn't, it felt like my heart broke a little more." I reached for his hand, squeezing it firmly. He looked down at our intertwined fingers, then continued. "Dad tried to balance it, but he was quiet, always avoiding conflict. I learned early on that if Mom decided I wasn't worthy in that moment, no one was going to step in. I promised myself I'd never do that to my kids. But watching Emily's face that day, it was like looking in a mirror. Tears pricked my eyes as his voice cracked. I couldn't let her think she wasn't enough. Not even once. Not even for a second." His words sank deep into me. It wasn't only about Emily anymore. It was about healing something broken in himself. He had carried those scars for years, hidden beneath layers of strength, until that moment forced them into the light. And in standing up for Emily, he had stood up for himself, for the little boy who had needed someone to fight for him. Meanwhile, within the family, whispers spread. My phone buzzed with texts from my sisters-in-law, some apologizing, others confessing that they had felt the sting of favoritism too. They admitted that their children had sometimes been left out of these rituals, though never so blatantly. They said they admired what Mark had done, that they wished they'd had the courage to say something sooner. But not all messages were kind. A cousin called me, her tone clipped. "You embarrassed her," she said. "She didn't mean any harm, it was just a bracelet. You could have handled it quietly." I bit back my anger and simply replied, "It wasn't about a bracelet. It was about my daughter's heart." That night, I told Mark about the call. He shook his head, his jaw tightening. That's the problem, he muttered. Everyone keeps excusing it, brushing it aside, saying she didn't mean harm. But harm is harm, whether she meant it or not. The next weekend, we were invited to a smaller gathering at his sister's house. I was hesitant, worried about another confrontation, but Mark insisted we should go. We can't hide, he said. Emily deserves to feel welcome, and I want them to see we're not backing down. When we arrived, the atmosphere was cautious, strained, but polite. The children ran off to play, their laughter echoing down the hall. Emily still carried the pocket watch in her little purse, pulling it out proudly when her cousins asked about it. Some admired it genuinely, others glanced nervously toward their parents. At dinner, the silence around the table was thick. Finally, one of Mark's sisters cleared her throat. That watch. It really suits Emily, she said softly. Dad would have been proud. Mark looked up, meeting her eyes. Dad wanted it to go to someone who understood family. Emily does. More than most adults. His words landed heavily, but his tone wasn't angry. It was firm, resolute. The conversation shifted then, cautiously at first, but gradually more openly. Stories surfaced, times when they too had felt slighted, times when their children had cried quietly in the car on the way home. Bit by bit, the truth unraveled, the silence lifting like a fog. And though my mother-in-law wasn't there, her absence seemed louder than her presence ever was. Later that night, as we drove home, Emily asleep once more in the back seat, Mark reached across and took my hand. Maybe this is the start of something better, he said. Maybe by standing up, we gave everyone else permission to do the same. I squeezed his hand, believing him. Sometimes one act of defiance, one declaration of love is enough to change the course of a family. And in that moment, I realized Emily had inherited something far more valuable than a watch. She had inherited the courage of her father, the strength to break cycles, the proof that love can rewrite a legacy. Weeks turned into months, and though the sting of that day lingered, life began to settle into a new rhythm. Emily grew more confident, often spinning stories about how her grandpa's watch was magical. Sometimes she would press it to her ear and whisper, "It's telling me secrets, Mommy." Other times she'd announce proudly to her friends, "This watch proves I belong." It was her anchor, her symbol of being chosen, and I watched as it nurtured a quiet strength in her. For Mark, however, the weight of that moment stayed heavy. He couldn't escape the memories. It stirred shadows of a boy who had waited for recognition that never came. One evening, after Emily was asleep, he confessed, "You know, Mom called me the day after the party. She didn't apologize. She said I humiliated her." His voice was low, bitter. "She still doesn't see what she did." I felt anger rise in me, but Mark only shook his head. "I'm done chasing her approval. I used to think if I worked hard enough, if I was successful enough, maybe one day she'd see me. But I realized something she'll never see, what she doesn't want to. And that's not Emily's burden to carry." Those words marked a turning point. Mark stopped answering his mother's calls as often. When he did, he kept the conversations short, polite, but distant. He no longer sought her validation, no longer bent himself to fit her mold. Instead, he poured his energy into Emily. Saturday mornings became their ritual, pancakes in the kitchen, sticky fingers, laughter spilling through the house as he taught her how to flip the batter just right. Sometimes he would take her into the garage, showing her how the watch worked, explaining each moving part as though it were a secret language passed from father to child. And slowly, I saw something healing in him. In choosing Emily, he was also choosing himself. He was rewriting the story of his own childhood. But family ties are rarely severed cleanly. Holidays arrived, and with them, the question of whether to attend gatherings. Emily, innocent and eager, asked if Grandma would be giving out more gifts this year. I hesitated, but Mark answered calmly, "Maybe she will. Maybe she won't. But remember, sweetheart, gifts don't decide who belongs in this family. You already do." Emily nodded, though I could see the confusion behind her smile. When Christmas came, we did go. The house was decorated as lavishly as ever, garlands draped across the banister, candles flickering in every corner. The tension was palpable the moment we walked in, but this time Mark's presence was unshakable. Emily held his hand, the pocket watch tucked safely in her little purse. My mother-in-law approached her, smile forced but determined. She handed Emily a gift, a doll wrapped in shiny paper. Emily accepted it politely, thanked her, and then pulled out her watch, holding it proudly. "I brought Grandpa's watch," she said. The room fell silent, the unspoken weight pressing down on everyone again. My mother-in-law's eyes flickered, shame crossing her face before she quickly looked away. The rest of the evening passed without spectacle. But I could see the shift. The power she once wielded over these gatherings was gone. Her favoritism had been exposed, her control fractured. The children played freely, the parents no longer glancing nervously at her for approval. It was subtle, but undeniable. The family dynamic had changed. Later at home, as Emily fell asleep under the glow of twinkling Christmas lights, Mark whispered to me, "That watch, it's more than an heirloom now. It's a reminder. Every time she holds it, she'll remember that her worth isn't decided by anyone else. And maybe it'll remind me too." I brushed my hand against his cheek. "It already has. You've given her what you never had. That's the greatest gift." He smiled, faintly weary but proud. Then maybe this whole mess was worth it. In the quiet of that night, I realized he was right. Pain had cracked open old wounds, but in doing so, it had allowed something stronger to grow. Love, fierce and unwavering, had stepped in where cruelty once lived. And through it, Emily had received not just a piece of gold and gears, but a legacy of protection and belonging. As the years unfolded, the memory of that day never faded, though its sharpness softened into something more profound. Emily grew older, her world expanding beyond stuffed bunnies and bedtime stories, yet the pocket watch never lost its place. It remained in a small glass case on her dresser, polished and ticking, a constant reminder of love that had refused to let her be diminished. Sometimes she would take it out before a big test at school, or before trying something new, and I could see how it steadied her, how it whispered courage into her young heart. Mark, too, changed. The man who once carried quiet resentment toward his mother now carried a new kind of strength. He no longer flinched at family gatherings, no longer allowed the unspoken rules of favoritism to dictate how he behaved. Instead, he walked into every room with the certainty that he would not let silence condone cruelty. It didn't mean reconciliation was easy. His relationship with his mother remained strained, sometimes cold. But he had drawn a line, and that line gave him peace. Emily noticed the difference as well. One evening when she was about 10, she curled up beside me on the couch and asked Mommy, "Why didn't Grandma want me to have a bracelet like the others?" My breath caught the old wound reopening, but before I could answer, Mark spoke from across the room. His voice was calm, steady. "Because sometimes people forget how to love the right way. But that's not your fault. And it's never who you are." Emily nodded slowly, then smiled. "That's okay. I have the watch." "That's better." I watched as Mark's eyes softened, pride glistening behind the weight of unshed tears. In that moment, I saw clearly he had turned his own childhood pain into a shield for his daughter, transforming neglect into a lesson in love. The family over time could no longer ignore what had been exposed. My sisters-in-law began speaking up when their children were treated unfairly. My nieces and nephews, older now, sometimes teased gently about the bracelets, but they also pointed out that Emily had the real treasure. And in many ways, they were right. The watch was no longer just an heirloom. It had become a symbol of a turning point, not just for Emily but for the family itself. Years later, on the night before Emily's high school graduation, I found her sitting at her desk, the watch open, in front of her. She looked up at me, her eyes bright with determination. Every time I look at this, I remember that Daddy stood up for me. It makes me want to be strong too. For other people. My chest ached with pride as I realized the legacy Mark had passed on was already bearing fruit. She wasn't just carrying a watch, she was carrying the courage to fight for others, the understanding that kindness was a choice, and the knowledge that she was worth standing up for. And I knew as I looked at her that this was the real inheritance, not jewelry, not money, not tradition, but the proof that love, when defended fiercely, can rewrite the story of a family. So if you've ever sat in silence while someone you love was treated as less than, I hope this story reaches you, because silence protects no one. Speaking up, even when it shakes the room, can change everything. It can heal wounds that have festered for generations. It can give a child the gift of knowing they matter. Sometimes the most valuable inheritance isn't gold or heirlooms, it's the courage to break cycles, the strength to love loudly, and the choice to say, enough. That's what Mark gave Emily. That's what every child deserves. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe, and let us know in the comments what it made you feel. Your voice matters, and your kindness can inspire more than you know.